without further ado, I would like to invite to the stage our next speakers. We have a very great lineup. Mohammad, Sear of Ernst & Young, and Scott Thiel of Hedera. These are the names of blockchain. Please, round of applause for the next panel talking about real-world asset tokenization.
Real-world asset tokenization. Spotlight on new trends.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know, like me, probably all of you have been waiting for this session because it's going to bring some materialistic part to the whole blockchain and crypto field of play. I have with me over here a real expert in this space, and I'll let him introduce himself properly himself, but just to give a little bit of a background to myself. Started my career in the UK's public service, moved to Dubai almost 24 years ago, thinking it would be just for a couple of years, and 24 years has flown by and I'm still here. And I'm amazed to see how Dubai has become the center for everything to do with emerging technologies. And this is one of them, which is really amazing, and we're seeing a good amount of use cases in this specific field. So Scott, can you please quickly introduce yourself and what you've been doing and why you're in Dubai, and then we'll get into some really tough questions for you.
Sure, thank you. Great to be here. So Scott Thiel, I was a lawyer for many years at a global law firm, and 5 or 6 years ago I was a technology-focused lawyer, tech and fintech. And about 5 years ago, I got very interested in distributed ledger technology. I joined Hedera Government Council, it's a layer 1 protocol, and then founded a company, a tokenization business. We were looking to create data-rich tokens. The challenge globally, it's been interesting this afternoon to hear about some of the observations around regulation. I was in Hong Kong at that point in time, and I then got the opportunity to work with Farah, part of the team that wrote the regulatory framework here in Dubai. That led to me being invited to move here, bring the company here, and then obtain the first Farah licenses again, which was quite an interesting process. And so that's why I'm now here, and I do some of the things we've heard in the panels this afternoon around the opportunity that the Middle East and Dubai in particular now represents in terms of being able to do the things that many other markets are still struggling from in terms of a regulated and compliant route to market.
Great. So before we start talking about the tokenization of things, let's talk about humanizing ourselves. We were talking about earlier on, and I was trying to say, the audience always wants to know the person behind the name. What's important to them? And for me, for example, as I mentioned, I'm really passionate about wanting to make a difference in people's lives. So for me then, working with governments, regulators, policymakers around the world, it becomes quite interesting because through that I can try to make a difference in people's lives, because one policy, one change in regulation can make a huge difference in the experience and the lifestyle of an individual living in a country. What's that one thing for you that you're so passionate about and which people can associate with Scott?
Yeah, there's probably two things. One is my deep love of nature and the need to get immersed in it. So in Hong Kong, I used to do a lot of trail running through the mountains. Here in Dubai, it's more getting on a bicycle and out through the desert on the Kudra. But in terms of the context of what we're talking about here, I'm a futurist. I love contemplating how tomorrow is going to be better than today, and the confluence of DLT technology. How can we use this technology in a way that actually meaningfully makes a difference to the way society operates? And I've been involved heavily in crypto. I'm a director of a crypto project and been a government council member on that project. However, I think the real potential of this technology is to fundamentally change the way the financial systems work, which are very exclusive in reality. So for me, the real, the why am I here? Why did I build this? Why are we trying to do this thing? It's to actually democratize finance on both sides of that ledger, whether it's asset owners or asset issuers. And the truth is today that the traditional financial ecosystem only services a very small part of the community. So for me, this is around the democratization of finance.
Yeah, and generally it's that part of the community that it can afford the money in the first place. So let's start with the 101 about tokenization. What is it?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, this. We obviously have had tokens for a while now. Bitcoin was the first. And we've seen the rise of cryptocurrencies throughout, over the past sort of 15 years. But at their core, most of those cryptocurrencies have relatively limited functionality and they don't represent much. They might give you a right to vote on something, so there are governance elements. They might be useful as a gas fee, so you can pay for underlying services on a protocol. And perhaps they might be used to secure the network, so proof of stake the network, use it from a security point of view. But as an investor or somebody who's buying these things, there's not an awful lot there that you can sort of say what it is you actually bought. The next evolution of that to me was things like, the digital art, the NFTs, the digital apes, which was not something we were particularly involved in, but it started to represent, well, actually these tokens can have a little bit more. Now, for me, tokenization is, I was a lawyer, and for me, tokenization was the digital evolution of law. All of those things today that we know and get documented in contracts, usually between two parties making financial instruments or rights to products or rights to experience, tickets, any bundle of rights today that typically sits in a contract can now be represented in this digital form. And so to me, tokenization is how do we take any bundle of rights and how do we now put it into this digital form so it can be sold, traded, fractionalized, collateralized, moved around, etc. And so it's really quite a broad definition, but that to me is what this is about, is we can take anything and now put it into this new digital form.
And where do you see the value in this? Because obviously in today's world, we talk about physical stuff, particularly in tokenizing it, is happening in one shape or form. What's so different about using blockchain or any other technology to really tokenize it?
So the difference today, I think, is going to be access. Access, I'll start on both sides of the equation. So access, and I'm going to touch on VARA and some pieces of why it's different here. So to me, how do I access, if I have an asset, how do I access capital? Let's use real estate, for example. How do I access capital associated with real estate? Well, there's very traditional things that we all know, like mortgages, but they're very fixed. They have a certain type. You can have X% of the value and it's a fixed this, and it's associated with a single real estate asset, and that's great for those who are rich enough to buy a home and for those who are able to meet the criteria of the bank to get the mortgage, etc. So there's an example of how do you get finance associated with a real estate asset. But in reality, there are only so many products and so many people who can participate in that. What this technology allows, and combined with the new regulatory framework, particularly here in Dubai under VARA, is the ability to look at that underlying asset, real estate, and now create brand new things, brand new ways of accessing it. So the ability for an asset owner to say, well, instead of just selling my property, or instead of maybe liquidating some of it through a traditional mortgage, I can now actually do what in old world might look more like equity crowdfunding, but without the need to do equity, without the restrictions of equity crowdfunding. So by tokenizing and fractionalizing real estate, you can say to people, well, would you like to own a piece of this? Now, for many years in Hong Kong, I talked about the IFC coin. The IFC, the International Financial Centre, tallest building on Hong Kong Island. We can do the same here, the Burj Khalifa coin. Who would like to own a fractional piece of that asset in a way that gives them exposure to the operating profits of that fantastic, iconic building, but also gives them exposure to the capital appreciation of that asset? Now that just doesn't exist today. People will say, and my colleagues in the law firm from the real estate department talk about REITs as being fractional investment in property, but the truth is REITs are usually, they're more like a fund. They're a bundle of assets, they're all smooth, they're very, very managed. There's very limited investor connection I see with REITs. It's something people might buy as part of their retirement portfolio planning. But there's very little sort of direct connection to the asset. Now this technology is going to allow an asset owner to say, well, I'm going to give people the ability to buy a piece of this and get exposed to it. On the flip side, investors are now going to be able to have access to these assets. And one of the really interesting things with the VARA regulations is they've opened it up to retail investors. So it's not just only rich people can play. Now that to me is an important part of the democratization process.
And that's what I was thinking while you were talking about. In a way, it's kind of like as an individual, a physical thing I own. it's like, you know, I'm IPOing it, you know. So I've done an IPO of my building or my house through the tokenization.
I love that, and that's exactly what, to me, we saw a version of IPOs in ICOs, but they were just these coins which were very sentiment orientated and querying how do you truly value a crypto coin. A lot of it's sentiment, but you can truly value something like a piece of real estate because it has a fairly well understood, you know, value based on valuations you can get done. It has a P&L, it has operating revenue, so you can do a more traditional analysis. And I see tokenization as the hybrid between the very expensive, only suits very large companies who've got the ability to do an IPO and the kind of unregulated ICO world that we saw. This is the very interesting hybrid, that mix between traditional finance and the new technology and what that's going to enable. It has to be regulated and it will be regulated. The last panel, it's good to hear all of the exchanges acknowledging they're all going to be regulated everywhere in the world. That's where we're heading. We've always been focused on these assets being regulated offerings, but it is that mix of the old and the new in a new way that's going to create more opportunities.
So what are the kind of types of assets that you see on the rise at the moment?
We've been working on a range of things. So funds are very obvious. Funds, if you like, almost are fractional because there's an asset that's put into a fund that is then sold off in units. It's almost a structure that is almost fractionalized already. So it's a relatively easy and familiar legal structure to be doing tokenization. We're seeing a lot of interest from real estate. The challenge with real estate and indeed any asset that sits in a government registry is how do you structure it in a way that you can do these things, real-time settlement and lightning speed things, but you have to then go and turn around and deal with the paper-based wax, seal, stamped, chopped days of settlement. And so again, we've been structuring a lot of these deals in a way that bridges the gap between those two, so that you can get the benefits of this very high-speed, real-time settlement technology, and the fact that the underlying asset actually sits in a corporate registry or a land registry or some other piece. But real estate is going to be a very significant. What we've seen globally is a lot of pent-up demand for people to do this on both sides, investors and asset owners. What's going to unlock here now in the Middle East is the regulatory frameworks that allows you to do it, because it's just incredibly difficult to do.
Yeah, I was going to pick on that. You obviously moved over here about a year or so ago. You must have seen something in Dubai, particularly in this region. What's that different governmental or infrastructure level, let's say, that you feel that this is the place to be, and what made you really shift over here? Because you were in Hong Kong, if I remember correctly.
I was in Hong Kong for a decade, and in the UK for a decade before that, and originally from Australia. The difference was the emergence of a completely new regulatory environment. You know, they're a brand new regulator. They're not a traditional financial services regulator digitising, so they're unencumbered by that which they already have. I was lucky enough to be part of a team that wrote the regulations, so I got a very good insight into the regulations. I remember the first week of that project, when we flew over here from Hong Kong. We were working with the SFC and Monetary Authority in Singapore, so we had global expertise to do this, and we won the project. And I came over here, and in the first meeting in that first week, the virus team introduced themselves to us as entrepreneurs first and regulators second. That, in a nutshell, is the difference, because most regulators around the world are focused on nothing goes wrong on my watch is the number one, whereas here it's things are going to go wrong, particularly in a new industry. We'll get the market going and then we'll iterate. So they're kind of building the plane as it flies, but they're prepared to actually experiment and let people operate. So that's fundamental. Getting a little bit more granular, every digital asset, every virtual asset is now regulated in Dubai. Doesn't matter whether it's a crypto or a digital art NFT or a governance token or a utility token or a complex financial instrument, they all fall within the same definition of virtual asset. That is a huge problem. Again, we've heard in other panels this afternoon. I don't know who my regulator is. I don't know what one of these things is. I don't know why this new asset we've created. It might be a security or a commodity or something else. We don't know. That problem's gone away here, and that's going to provide a lot more certainty.
So we're coming to the end of our chat, and it's gone past very fast. I think the one thing that maybe would be useful for all of us to hear from you is, like, if we are interested in getting as individuals into the tokenizing tokenization space. What's your advice, and how do we avoid making a mistake and investing money in a way that actually doesn't pay off for us?
Well, one of the things that we've been very focused on is, if you look at traditional investment involves lots of meaningful disclosures about the underlying asset. That's the way it works. That hasn't been the case in crypto and ICOs. There's been a white paper that has notional, kind of information about what it is it's going to be. To me, it's really important for asset owners who are wanting to tokenize to work with people like ourselves who are going to help them to properly document. So we have strict onboarding requirements in terms of who we'll be working with. The other thing to look at is to make sure you're thinking about which technology you're using. I'm sitting here today as a representative and board member of Hedera. There are lots of different choices of protocols, but they actually have some pretty fundamental differences. So some of the better known protocols we see today, I don't think you would want to be doing real world asset tokenization on a protocol that has a habit of going down 24 hours at a time, because that might be okay in NFT land, but if you're actually trying to run a business or finance, that's no good. You can't have the network's down for a day or 2 days. So stability, governance, and again, green credentials. There is a carbon negative chain. A lot of these kind of meaningful aspects of the underlying technology are going to be important, as well as the quality of the token and the amount of information that goes into it.
Scott, thank you for that. Really appreciate it, and it was a great chatting with you. I wish we had more time, but we need to evacuate the floor for the next panel discussion to start. Thank you.
Thank you.